What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. We're going to look at Pyromancer today and specifically Phaser. Those of you that have been fans of the channel for a while will know that I have a huge love in my heart for this skill, and with the latest patch from PCF, of course this skill, or more specifically status power, took a massive hit. And since this skill is so directly tied to how much status power you can stack, of course the power of this suffered. Now that, in combination with the correcting, if I can call it that, of Mage's Rage, has essentially produced a bit of a power vacuum here and has resulted in us having to try and get more creative to get Phaser to still be the workhorse of a build. Our first challenge comes from the fact that not a lot of the legendary pieces for the Pyromancer actually stack status. And when they do, it's better to actually use those sets for something else. A good example of this is Lava Lich, which stacks a lot of status, but if you're going to build Lava Lich, you might as well use Eruption. So the first challenge, as mentioned here, is for us to find a way to get as many pieces with status on it, so that when we're talking about an overall status, which we get from 6 pieces, 5 pieces of armor and 1 weapon, we want to have the majority of those pieces actually having status on them. And the current configuration that I have this build right now, I'm using Akari, and the best I can do is 4 out of the 6 pieces having status. Now this gives me an advantage in 2 ways. First of all, it clearly opens up an upgrade path for me for this build, which means that if I'm able to change some of these pieces to purple pieces that have status on them and anomaly, then I'm actually going to see a massive power increase for this build. And secondly, until the time when we are actually able to find those purple pieces, we can use the additional damage that we get from the Heat Wave Akari interaction to further on boost our Phaser to make up for that lost status. Since we're leaning heavily into status for Phaser, we can also then use burnt offerings in our PAX tree and actually make our burns, which tick after we apply something like Heat Wave to the enemies as well as Phaser, deal as much damage as possible. Now this is super awesome, and this actually helps you a lot with tough enemies that you have to hit multiple times with Phaser, because these burns, as long as you keep them up, as long as you keep the burn going, will actually start ticking for ridiculous amounts, 10, 12, 15 upwards, millions of damage as these ticks continually apply this burn effect. Now this is super handy for bosses like the Second Arbiter, which with the old version of Phaser, where status was not being nerfed at higher levels, first of all, and secondly, Mage's Rage's ramp was so insane, we could pull off these crazy, 2-3 shot executes on the Arbiter. This change and using burnt offerings allows us to actually leverage the burn damage that we get from the status ramping that we're doing, and that kind of makes up for it in a way. Either which way, this build performs very well in expeditions as well as in boss-based content like trials, and it's kind of like, for me, a very good alternative to Eruption. Now in terms of power level, unfortunately I think Eruption is still the one that edges out onto the top in terms of overall raw damage that a Pyromancer can deliver with skills, but this certainly is a great way to play Phaser, and it is the way that my character is set up right now. When it gets to the actual build itself, we're going to do it the same way we always do it. We'll look at weapons, we'll talk about armor and the mods on them, we'll look at the skills and the rotation that you should be using, we'll talk about the class tree, your PAX choices, and last but not least, I will mention some Ascension points that you should be targeting to put points into first to get the most out of this build. Now, starting us off with weapons, and basically the point is I'm presenting you with 2 potential options here. Definitely, first of all, as a secondary or as a second alternative or a second primary, however which way you want to put that, the Anemoy with the old Moaning Winds Clip Combustion Radiation Splash, whether you're using that or maybe the Guillotine or something like that, this is just an all-round really good weapon to run around with, because any sticky enemies that don't die to your combo or that come running at you, often one rotation of this shotgun reload meta that I think is so well known by everybody, can sort out most enemies. Also, this is a fantastic way to not have to spend skills or anything like that on trash, as you can just run past them and essentially reload while you're doing that, and it'll take care of the mess. Now, the 2 options that I was referring to is there's really 2 ways you can run this. Specifically, the Air to the Desert is a really good gun for this build for 2 reasons. First of all, we are going to be stacking through the whole armor pierce, resistance pierce combo. We're going to be stacking our AP. So the Heir to the Desert comes with armor pierce on it, which is fantastic. Secondly, the Heir to the Desert also comes with status power on it. Now, it is super important that we have status on our weapon as well, because that's one of our potential 6 slots where status power can come from that we stack onto this build. So you definitely want to be sitting with a weapon that has status power on it, and since we are using this armor pierce stacking, armor pierce is good as well. That's why Heir to the Desert is kind of like the Swiss Army knife for this build, and one of probably the best additions that you can put to this. Now, Heir to the Desert rolls with Sandstorm on it, but what else you want on here is you definitely want Fortress, and then you can put Mage's Rage on there, or vice versa, you want Mage's Rage and then you could put Fortress on it. That gives you a fantastic ramp stat stick, which means that most of the time you can just shoot your skills out and everything like that, but as soon as you want to start taking down something heavy, a boss, you just hit him a couple of times in the head, you make sure that you ramp up Fortress, which you'll see when the green glow hits your hands. And at that point in time, you'll also have some stacks from Mage's Rage, and then you just let fly with your combo, aka you pave the way with a nice fat phaser. Now, if you don't have an Heir to the Desert, a very good alternative to that, or probably exactly the same thing in a way, is probably the Torment and Agony. Again, because it has armor pierce on it and it has status power on it. Again, the 2 substats that we're looking for. And again, you can just stack these sort of like stat stick mods on them, aka Mage's Rage and Fortress, and you're good to go. Now, when it comes to the armor itself, I have mentioned that we are using 3-piece Akari. The reason why we're using 3-piece Akari is because at least the helmet of the Akari has status power on it, and then furthermore, because we don't have status power on 2 of our other gear pieces, we are using the additional damage that we get from the bonus from the set, which says that every enemy damaged by heat wave grants 25% anomaly power bonus for 10 seconds. This is a massive bonus for us, and it means that we can work heat waves into our combo, and that empowers our phaser when we shoot it afterwards. Now, of course, the substat that we're looking for in this build, first and foremost, is we want anomaly power, we want status power, and we want cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction is going to get us really fast phaser hits, and it's also going to bring our heat waves back that much quicker, which allows us to do our rotations as much as we want, which means we can push out more damage. Skills, life leech, and so on can be a secondary stat in the case of if you can't have one of those primary ones, but especially when you go out hunting for purple pieces to replace some of the legendaries in this build with, your priority 100% is anomaly power, status power, cooldown reduction. Now, in the case of this helmet here, the helmet of the Akari, this rolls with Fire Tsunami on it, which increases the width of heat wave, which is great, which means you kind of don't have to aim. You can just sort of aim in the general direction of the enemies and the heat wave will cover them. We also have no resistance against the fortified on here because, as mentioned, we are using this combo where we turn armor piercing into resistance piercing, and we turn resistance piercing into anomaly power, which empowers our entire build. Scorched Earth on here is a fantastic way to just squeeze a little bit of additional damage out of Heatwave, because essentially what this is it doubles up your Heatwave. Instead of your Heatwave only going out as a wave, at the apex of the wave, it turns around essentially and comes back again. This is super handy because again, you're double dipping on the damage. And if for some reason, sometimes you can get a situation where you'll fire out a heat wave and it'll hit the stuff in front of you, and then some assholes will come running in from the side. Then on the way back, the heat wave is going to hit those dudes as well. They're going to be burning, which means now you start engaging all that delicious extra damage from status power, and it's just going to start doing the work. Our chest piece is the second piece of Akari here. We have Death Sentence on here, which really is probably one of the workhorse mods for pretty much any AP build that comes from the Pyromancer side. It's a very powerful debuff that the Pyromancer can apply by using Ash Blast, and this says that your weapon damage and your anomaly damage, respectively 40% and 30%, is increased on the targets that are hit by that Ash Blast for 5 seconds. It's really good, and it's again a fantastic way to essentially debuff an enemy right before you poke him with a phaser. Now, Tidal Wave is our second heat wave. You can run this build with 3 heat waves or with 2 heat waves. I definitely want you to have at least 2. I personally run with 2. 3 is entirely okay, and Heatwave actually performs very well and deals a fair amount of damage, especially due to the fact that it applies burn to so many things, and also because it cycles up your damage. But 2, I would say, is the bare minimum. 1 would be a little bit too little. Now, Captain Hunter on here is a way for us to deal more damage against captains, elites, and bosses. Again, trash folds like lawn furniture to this build, but you absolutely want to get as much help as you can against tough enemies, and this is what Captain Hunter is all about. Our third and final piece of Akari is, of course, the pants. Here we have Anomaly Echo, which is just a nice little boost to our anomaly power, which is on a 6-second cooldown. Not cooldown really, but it lasts for 6 seconds rather. Let me rephrase that. And this is essentially activated every time you use a skill. Now, we are driving a shitload of cooldown reduction onto this build, as well as from some of the choices which we make in our PAX tree. So the point is that we will have super low cooldowns on our skills, which means, generally speaking, as long as you're in a fight, this Anomaly Echo effect is on top. Now, Ashen Boost is really good for us here because it gives us 12% additional damage to everything that has the Ash status on it. That's phenomenal because we are pretty much using, again, Ash Blast as soon as it's on cooldown, because it's a debuff mechanic for us, as well as slowing the advance of enemies and just making it, much easier for you to control the map. Size matters on here, increases the radius, the girth, if you will, of the phaser beam. Now, by default, the phaser beam is essentially a scalpel. It shoots a very fine, thin line, and you kind of have to be super accurate to hit what you want, but size matters turns the phaser beam into a fucking sledgehammer. The point is, now you can simply aim in the general direction of a group of enemies and the phaser will essentially kill all of them. Now, Charms of the Lava Lich is on our gloves here because now we are trying to get as many pieces with status power on, except for the Akari set, and Lava Lich set is a fantastic place to get that from. So here we have Bullet Kindling, which says that we deal 12% more damage against enemies afflicted by burn. And we are applying burn all the time with this build, and those burns tick for very long. So this is just a flat big damage increase to anything that we've hit with a heat wave or anything like that. And it's just really good damage. Pure Power on here just increases the flat skill damage of phaser beam by essentially 1,000,000. It's a good way to stack on a little bit of additional damage onto phaser beam, and so that's the reason why we've included that. Ash Increase range is on here as well because, again, Ash Blast is a very utility heavy skill for us. Again, it's a debuffing mechanic. It's a way for us to stack damage onto enemies. It's a way for us to control the battlefield. So all of the utility that we can bake into that, in other words, for instance, making it reach farther, is a fantastic thing to do. What you have to remember though about Ash Blast, and I think I say this on every single video, is you have to remember that there's a fundamental difference between the way Ash Blast and Overheat works. People sometimes confuse this. Overheat is almost instant, so when you hit Overheat, it hits everything almost on the map, and you're like, wow, this is super cool. And then when you hit Ash Blast, what you have to notice is it moves out from you like a wave, almost like a sonic wave, like a ripple. And so that takes a little bit of time to cross. So in the real back end of the map, that can take anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 seconds to hit. And so the point is that if you are running through your combo quite quickly and you're going heat wave, Ash Blast, and you want to tag something that's further back and you want to get that debuff from Ash Blast before you hit him with the phaser, you got to give the Ash Blast a little bit of time to get there. Last but not least, we are using the Boots of the Lava Lich again so we can get some status power here. And this has Burnt Out on, which is a fantastic mod for Heatwave. It kind of like stacks even more damage on top of the set bonus that we get from Akari. And this is it, damaged enemies take 15% more damage for 5 seconds, stacking up to 2 times, so you can get this to 30%. Volcanic Armor on here is our only defensive mod and kind of like a free mod. I don't think you struggle with survivability with this build, simply due to the fact that you're dealing so much damage and stuff generally dies so quickly. But the reason why we have this on here is, of course, because we had to use the Boots for the Lava Lich. So if, for example, I replace this particular legs here with a purple piece that had anomaly power on it, had status power on it, and then losing volcanic armor would be a free mod for us, and we could find out something else here that we could add on to deal more damage. We have Unstoppable Force on here as well, which closes the loop on that whole combo of armor piercing to resistance piercing to anomaly power. Then when we get over to the skills themselves, now the rotation is fairly simple. The idea is set things on fire, get the bonus from Akari, Ash Blast things so you get the debuff on whatever you want to kill, hit him with a fucking phaser. That's it. Really easy, super easy. So, well, first thing we can notice is our cooldowns are hella low. Heat Wave is almost at 5 seconds, Ash Blast is under 10 seconds, and our Phaser Beam clocks that in just slightly over 7 seconds. Now, in combination with some of the things we're going to see later in the PAX tree, this means that you have, almost like on-demand access to all of your abilities. But again, your standard rotation on tough enemies, because again, one Heat Wave is enough to kill any trash in this game with this build. But what your standard rotation will be Heat Wave to ramp up on the trash. You hit him with the Ash Blast, you wait until that debuff is on him, and you punch the Phaser Beam right to their face. Now you'll notice, as mentioned, Phaser Beam has already some damage on board here, and then it says that it benefits from 210% of status power, which is again why it is so important for us to stack as much status power as possible. Now we have 2 ways of setting enemies on fire with our skills, plus a third way, which is of course if we actually run up to enemies and melee them, or AoE melee. That's our third way of setting things on fire. But Heat Wave inflicts burns on things, and so does Phaser Beam. So we have 2 sources of applying that status onto enemies as well. When we get over to the class tree, this is kind of like, I would say, the best setup. I think there's a universe that we live in where you don't dip into armor piercing, resistance piercing, and all of that, and you go bottom tree, maybe, because that certainly does stack your AP a lot more. But this, to me, with the current gear setup and this particular build, and due to the fact that we are stacking armor piercing and resistance piercing to give us additional anomaly power, middle tree is obviously where you want to go, with some caveats. You absolutely want to find a way to get yourself hot situation, because this is just a massive anomaly power increase every 10 seconds by 45% every time you use Ash Blast. So that shit's, golden. But in this particular case, we're going to go down along the bottom. We're going to pick ourselves up some anomaly power. We zip through the top here to get ourselves Wildfire, which is fantastic cooldown reduction. And then we go over here and we definitely get ourselves Extinction, which means that it increases damage by 20% against enemies below 30% HP. You're really going to notice that when you have something burning and it gets below that health threshold, and then you'll really start seeing those burns go through quite nicely. Now at this point in time, we quickly shoot up here. We get ourselves Hot Situation. To do that, we pass through Incinerate, which says that the moment burn ends on an enemy, inflict Ash status. So this is just another way for us to, if there's a tough enemy, if there's something that's putting pressure on you, and for some reason your burn status has fallen off that, you have some additional breathing room here, because an enemy will turn into Ashen, which of course freezes them. Now because you have so much status, that Ash also lasts super long, so they stay in that Ash status for a relatively long as well, which gives you time to reposition and hit them with something. And then of course you're also benefiting from the additional damage to ass. So win-win. Did I just say additional damage to ass? I guess so. And then, as mentioned, we pass through the tree and we get ourselves to Magma Elemental, which really just feeds into this armor piercing, resistance piercing, AP kind of triangle that we've built here, because this says that every time when you activate an Ignite skill, your armor piercing and resistance piercing is increased by 45% for 10 seconds. Now we have 2 Ignite skills on this build, and that is Heat Wave and Phaser. So while you are farming out your rotations and while a fight is lasting on, then you will have this benefit on you, which means massive gains to your anomaly power. Now the PAX tree itself, as mentioned, we want to be ending up at Burnt Offerings. So we do go bottom tree here. We get ourselves Melting Point, which is just another way our resistance piercing is increased, aka our anomaly power. We get ourselves Scorched Flesh, which is another stacking mechanism for status power, which is great. This says that when you use Ignite skills, it increases your status power by 10% for 5 seconds, and this can stack 3 times, aka 30%. We get ourselves Convection, which is not as good as it used to be, but still is quite phenomenal in dropping cooldowns of skills when other skills are on cooldown. So this says it reduces all skills cooldown by 2 seconds when all of your skills are on cooldown. So this is a good way for you to get a fast Ash Blast back, for instance, so that you can use it again. We go top in here to get Furnace, which says that increases your status power by 15% for every enemy afflicted with burn. This is the other reason why Heat Wave synergizes so well with this build, because if we have 6 enemies in front of us, we hit them with a Heat Wave, that is 6 times 15% of additional status power that now gets stacked on top of us, and then we shoot a phaser and it just deals that much more damage. Now, Burnt Offerings on here is kind of like the hidden star of this build, because this increases, first of all, your burn duration by 500%, which is really, really awesome. And then it says that each consecutive burn tick on an enemy deals 20% more damage. So those ticks keep on jumping up. So oftentimes when you apply this on a boss like the Arbiter or something like that, you'll see your burn started at 2 million, then it's 2.4, then it's 3, and it just that keeps ticking up. And as long as you keep that burn alive, you'll suddenly start seeing massive ticks of 10, 12, 14, 16 million just from a passive status that's ticking on the enemy, which is phenomenal. Now, last but not least, on our Ascension tree, this build is all about anomalies. So if you want to affect the damage of this build, you absolutely want to be picking up 10 pieces into anomaly damage first. Your next stop can be 10 points into anomaly power. And then because we're using the whole armor piercing, resistance piercing thing, you absolutely gain by putting 10 points into resistance pierce here and 10 points into armor pierce. Also really good to pick up is some additional cooldown reduction down here. And if for some reason you are struggling with survivability in a way, you can give yourself additional damage to elites, which could be problematic for you. You can give yourself less damage from elites, and you can increase your health and your armor if that's as a last ditch effort. That being said, this is one of those weird builds that actually performs better the lower your apocalypse tier, because the lower your apocalypse tier, if you have this exact configuration, the lower your apocalypse tier, the less status power penalty you're going to suffer, which means your phases are going to hit for harder. So as an example, this build is a hell of a lot. It's already impressive now, but it is a hell of a lot more impressive at like APOC 30, for instance. And even at 25, it fucking stinks. And that's it for the video as well as the build. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below if you still believe that we can hashtag make FASER great again. Have you built something similar to this? I think there's a couple of different ways you can do this. There's the very, very mysterious and awesome thermal bomb FASER beam eruption, which is certainly extremely spicy, and that's definitely something that I'm looking at putting together at some point in the next couple of weeks. But let me know in the comments down below what you would change here, if you've tried something similar to this, what were your impressions of it, and have you played it at a lower APOC level where it really performs exceptionally well. Again, thank you so much for spending time with me. It is just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.